Hello, everyone. We're just going to wait for another few seconds to allow more people to join, and then we'll get started. I can see lots of people coming in as I'm speaking. Okay, I think we can make a start. Welcome to the Lens webinar, Regenerating Landscapes, How Lens is Driving Collaboration for Resilience and Impact. We are excited to have this opportunity to talk to you, to showcase Lens, and to hear your questions for us. It's great that so many people are here today from such a wide variety of sectors. And amongst us, we have such a combined wealth of expertise in the landscape sector. I'm sure it will be a great session. So the webinar will run from now until 4:30 p.m., during which we will introduce you to Lens, what it is and how it works, give you a sneak preview of our impact report due to be launched at the end of May, and we will hear from the farm on how Lens funding has impacted at farm level. And we will leave 20 minutes for a Q&A session, during which we will take your questions from the Q&A function during the webinar. So please add questions as the session progresses, and I will monitor these and collect them for the end. So without further ado, I would like to introduce today's speakers. I'm Isabel Ross. I'm Lens Operations Director, and I have over 30 years experience in organic agriculture, farming, auditing and advising in the UK and Africa, developing organic standards and working in procurement for FMCG. I currently farm rare breed sheep in Wiltshire. Donald Lunan is Lens CEO. He has a background in ecology and sustainable agriculture, over 20 years working in international development, delivering climate change work and environment projects in the UK and globally. And Catherine Wallis is our impact director. Cat has a background in environmental science, economics and agronomy, over 20 years in sustainable agriculture and resilient livelihoods in Africa and Asia, and 5 years experience managing a community-supported vegetable farm in Northumberland. And Tris Baxter-Smith, he's our Lens East of England Senior Programme Manager. He is a farmer, a BASIS qualified land advisor, and has a background in sustainable agriculture, business development and education. So I will now pass to Donald Lunan, who will introduce the Lens model.
Thank you, Isabel. I'm very pleased to have you all with us here today for this webinar. This is an important moment in the growth of Lens as we launch our first impact report. This has been 5 years in the making, and it's a great pleasure to be able to showcase this today. But first, I wanted to provide a bit of an introduction to Lens. I know some of you on the call today will be familiar with the Lens approach, but to others, this will be a first exposure. Lens Landscape Enterprise Networks was an idea conceived by my colleague Tom Curtis, one of the founding directors of 3Q, the Oxford-based sustainability advisory company. Tom had been working as a farm manager in Oxfordshire for a number of years and had implemented approaches that would today be termed regenerative agriculture. And while he saw the benefits of those approaches within the farm, less inputs leading to more stable profit margins, healthier soils, greater biodiversity, better water quality, he felt that those outcomes should have been of interest to other stakeholders, water companies, environment agency and regulators, and the companies that were buying the grain from the farm. So having the ability to both share the costs and share the outcomes of better land management seemed like a win-win and was a clear gap. An opportunity to create a model that filled that gap emerged in Cumbria in northwest England. 3Q were working separately with Nestle, who were concerned about the resilience of their dairy supply following a series of significant flood event, and United Utilities, a water company who were worried about phosphorus runoff in the catchment that was affecting water quality. We spotted that while these were quite different risks, the solutions were likely to significantly overlap, and the first co-funded pilots took place in 2018. Our first lend region started trading in the east of England in 2021, and since then we have worked closely with Nestle, companies in particular Purina, and with other strategic partners in Diageo and Pepsi to refine the model. Throughout this webinar, we'll draw from our experience and learnings across all of the regions that we're working in, underscoring Lens as an adaptable model that delivers in a range of geographies and land uses, aligned to our mission to regenerate the landscapes that we all depend on. Next slide, please. At the heart of Lens is the essential and practical needs that we derive from our landscapes. We need functioning and resilient landscapes for our food production, for water provision, for biodiversity, for recreation, for infrastructure, for livelihoods. We need these landscapes to continue to deliver for us and to be resilient to the current and future challenges. And the challenges are significant. I'm sure most of you on the call today will be familiar with the types of numbers that are on the screen just now, but biodiversity is collapsing. Our soils are degraded. Climate change is already having impact, and water scarcity is going to be a material issue for over half the world's population by the middle of this century. Next slide. And at the landscape scale, we're becoming increasingly aware of the impacts of these issues, but also how they're interlinked, and in many cases reinforcing and accelerating the risks. We're already starting to see the economic impacts. Our faltering landscapes are starting to present material risks to the organisations and the communities that depend on them, threatening food security, livelihoods and infrastructure. Of course, these risks sit within the wider political and social discourse of policy, of trade, of tariffs and conflicts that further add to that fragility. Next slide. Yeah. And this in turn leads to real world impacts. Drawing examples from 3 of our current land regions, we're starting to see how these threats are creating material risks to companies within those landscapes. So for instance, in 2019 into 2020, an exceptionally mild winter led to an explosion in the aphid population, the vector for yellowing virus in sugar beet. Coupled with changes in the policy landscape that restricted the use of certain types of pesticides, the mild winter led to significant reductions in yield in sugar beet, with 25% across the east of England region, but some individual farms losing almost their total crop. In Scotland in 2018, several whisky distilleries had to reduce or even stop production due to a prolonged drought there, which obviously had impact on the business directly, but the low levels of rainfall also impacted on the quality of the barley that was being produced, the key raw ingredient for whisky production. And then lastly, drought, followed by floods in northern Italy, saw impacts on the harvest of grapes used in Prosecco production, with yields down by 15%. But also huge soil losses through erosion, which compounds the longer term impacts events like these have on future yields. And while each of these examples in the previous slide were drawn from the food and drink companies, what we see in landscapes is organisations spotting the emerging risks and seeking to take action to ensure that their particular supply chain or crop of interest is made more resilient. By taking individual action, investing in ecosystem services or nature-based solutions and regenerative agriculture, it's possible to address one specific issue or constraint, but it's not going to have impact beyond the scale of that intervention. It doesn't start to tackle the interconnected nature of those risks, and may in turn be limited by the availability of funds, both public and private, which can fluctuate. To have impact that we need, to see the systemic changes that we require, we need to bring these stakeholders together to collaborate. While their needs and risks may differ, by taking collective action, the scale of impact is greater, with opportunities to share costs while maximising outcomes. And so this is where Lens comes in. Lens is a really simple mechanism that facilitates that collective action. By bringing together organisations that depend on specific landscapes and pooling their funding for nature-based solutions and regenerative agriculture, we can maximise the impact. Farmers and land managers are funded to undertake activities that address the needs of those organisations. We then measure the outcomes across a number of metrics on soil, on biodiversity, on climate mitigation, water, and report that back to the funding organisations. We know that all stakeholders within a landscape have a shared objective around resilience, both farm businesses and the organisations, public and private, that depend on those landscapes. And we focus on the commercial relationships that all stakeholders are familiar with. This is not complex financial constructs or holding farmers to long-term contracts. It's about facilitating action, brokering multi-party contracts that allow for shared objectives to be realised. Each lens is place-based, and we work with stakeholders and partners in each region to deliver locally relevant interventions. And a little bit about the payments. The payments are framed around 3 different mechanisms. At the heart of all of these is the provision of agency to the farmer and the land managers to ensure that they can determine what measures are implemented on their land. In the first instance, farmers are able to propose measures that they would like to trial, measure by measure, based on an agreed list of interventions aligned with the stated needs of the funders. This is ideal for farmers and funders who are just dipping their toe into the regenerative approaches, and is important to ensure that we continue to onboard new farmers into lens. Examples of the most popular measures implemented in 2024 included practices such as reduced till, cover crops, reduced synthetic inputs, and the planting of hedgerows. For the second payment mechanism, payment for outcomes, we're able to reward farmers for farming regeneratively, paying per hectare on the basis of a farmer meeting key principles of regenerative agriculture, on crop diversity, on keeping soil covered throughout the year, minimising soil disturbance, reducing inputs, and setting aside land for nature. This allows farmers to move away from measure-by-measure payments and to have greater control over how they achieve regenerative agriculture principles. This is attractive to farmers that are already quite advanced on their regen journey and rewards them for maintaining these high standards while implementing measures that work best for their farm. This is also attractive to funders who are then able to target outcomes rather than the means of achieving those outcomes, simplifying the process. The final option is for innovation or targeted measures. This is an important element of lens as it allows us to continue to push the boundaries of what helps to build a resilient landscape and offers the opportunity to farmers to present new ways of achieving core regenerative principles. Examples include the trialling of new technologies, such as drones for sowing cover crops or adapting practices used in different systems or from other lens regions. Or through specific calls for proposals to identify ways of dealing with a specific problem in regenerative agriculture. So, for instance, a persistent weed or a pest specific to a particular crop. Many innovations that are found to work are then included within the standard measures the following year. And we also fund targeted measures where we fund interventions that address specific risks that are of concern for funders, such as water companies or local authorities. You can think of things like flood mitigation or woodland creation, which may not necessarily take place on productive land. Lens is now operating in 5 regions, in the east of England and Yorkshire, in the UK, in Poland, in Western Hungary, and in Northern Italy. We've just launched 2 further lenses in the UK this year, one in the Leven region of Scotland, just north of Edinburgh, and another in West Wales, with the first trades there currently taking place. And we are scoping another 5 regions currently, so two more regions in Scotland, in the borders, and in the Spey, Leinster and Munster in the Republic of Ireland, the Noord-Brabant in the Netherlands, and in southern Spain. And as you can imagine, the land uses and production systems in each of these regions is quite diverse. But Lens is a mechanism that brings together the range of stakeholders that can start to address the risks and challenges within those landscapes. And across those landscapes, the organisations and stakeholders we work with is really diverse. On the slide are examples from our existing 5 active regions with food and beverage companies, water utilities, local government, and insurance companies. But with each trade, the partnership broadens further. We onboard fresh organisations into existing regions, and with new partners engaging in our new land regions. So, for example, in Scotland and Wales, that are just getting going just now, we're working with national and local government, we're working with energy utilities, we're working with dairy companies, and we're currently onboarding a large international drinks manufacturer into the east of England this year, and the process of onboarding a retailer into Hungary. And in each landscape, we work with a range of local organisations, providing extended networks of farmers and land managers, getting deep technical knowledge along with the local presence and support. The power of Lens is to leverage the diverse partners to create something that is greater than the sum of our individual parts. And we see Lens grow in scale and impact. Over the past 4 years, we've seen rapid year-on-year growth, with further growth this year. The values on this schematic reflect the amount of funding provided directly to farmers and land managers each year to deliver that landscape resilience, the strengthened ecosystem services, and to de-risk the transition to regenerative agriculture. Cumulatively over £20 million, or 24 million euros in 4 years, and this is likely to be close to 38 million euros by the end of this year. This is material amounts of money to farmers, and as you will see shortly with Kat's presentation, is starting to generate real impact. So finally, by taking a holistic approach, we are delivering more for our partners. As Kat will explain shortly, the information and data that we are collecting across different regions is starting to tell a compelling story of the wider impact of our interventions, and how we are starting to learn how a range of interventions across a landscape is starting to deliver for funders and for farmers. I hope this has provided some insights into the Lens model and how and where we operate. I'll now hand over to Kat, who will walk us through the headlines from the 2024 Impact Report.
Thank you, Donald. I'm delighted to see so many of you on the webinar today, and happen to have the best slot, which is to present our impact. Capturing our impact is about recognizing the full value of farming in building resilient landscapes. Our business is about securing harvests for years to come, learning to live with unpredictable weather patterns, and ensuring that farm businesses thrive for future generations to come. We've had to make sure that our impact measurement was looking at a range of outcomes right from the start, and much beyond carbon. Right from the start, we looked at the most pragmatic ways to capture the holistic benefits of regenerative farming, with metrics that could evidence how Lens is helping farms to restore soils, protect water resources, enhance biodiversity, and adapt to climate change, without embarking on complex surveys, placing further burden on farmers, or excessive costs on our funders. 2 years ago, we designed a measurement, reporting, and verification approach, also called MRV, to measure and track impact on farms. The approach needed to be scalable without compromising on data quality. We ran a measurement pilot on 100 farms on 4 landscapes in Europe and the UK. During this pilot, we trialed multiple ways of collect data from farms, either by using in-person auditors that would come and visit farms, or by asking farmers to complete online platforms and tools, or either manually or by connecting with their farm management systems. We found that for the most part, farmers really preferred in-person visits rather than impersonal surveys or platforms to complete. They also liked to voice their stories and what changes they were seeing on their farms. During this process, we listened a lot, and from that, we developed our first MRV protocol in 2024. Our protocol defines our guardrails for data quality, with clear and practical guidelines ensuring consistency, transparency, and comparability. It follows carefully the guidance from key frameworks such as the Greenhouse Gas Protocols, LSRG, and the Science Based Target Initiative's flag guidance. We organized an independent external review of our protocol to make sure it aligned with these core standards. Our protocol also documents how we meet and surpass the SCI platform's new Regenerating Together framework measurement requirements. And when it comes to soil carbon, we have chosen to work with AgriCarbon, providing us with a great deal of confidence on how we baseline our carbon stocks. Their statistical sampling design and processes are well recognized as best in class. We currently visit every single farm rather than a subset of farms, and will continue to do so until we have 3 years worth of data from each farm. This makes our data very robust and contextualized, and every year we'll continue to review and upgrade our protocol to ensure it retains high integrity. For the first time, we have consolidated evidence on our impact across the UK, Poland, Italy, and Hungary, having collected data from over 280 farms. Lens will have transacted 24 million euros directly to farms since 2021, availing farmers the peace of mind to trial new technologies and practices that are right for them and on flexible contractual terms, whilst covering some of their transition risks and costs in the process. This works out to an average payment from Lens of £120 per hectare, with a significant proportion of farms receiving funding from multiple funders. 2024 marks the first year in which we can report actual year-on-year impact from verified practices on farm. We measure both impacts directly linked to Lens funding, as well as the impact at the whole farm level. This helps us understand each farm's trajectory and what it looks like at the landscape level. This means that we can better identify opportunities and tailor the funding in future rounds. So collectively, what does that look like? Well, farms participating in Lens will have saved nearly 50,000 tonnes of carbon emissions and removals in just 1 year. The soils that help grow food and reduce flood risks are being restored and are helping sequester carbon to an average of 1.83 tonnes per hectare per year, compared with starting stocks, which is good for soil health and plant growth. And beyond food production, Lens also supports the creation and management of biodiversity habitats on farm, whether that's through adding hedgerows, planting wildflower strips, or the creation of water storage ponds and leaky dams. We've helped create the equivalent of nearly 100 football pitches of dedicated space for nature in 1 year. I'll now dive a little closer on these 4 impact areas. Healthy soils are by far the largest natural capital asset upon which food production depends, but also a whole range of ecosystem services, such as water and climate regulation. Farming practices that lead to improved soil health are many, and in Lens, the most popular ones are to minimize soil disturbance through reduced tillage, to reduce the use of synthetic fertilizers, herbicides, and pesticides, and third, keeping soils covered with living roots in the soil. And we're thrilled to see that Lens is pushing the boundaries with farms adopting more of these practices that are key to regenerating soils. As well as tracking practice adoption, we know that we also need hard empirical data on actual biophysical changes. Measuring changes in soil organic carbon through time is a key metric that holds many purposes. For evidencing, for example, the buildup in soil organic matter, which is important for soil nutrient uptake by plants, or to capture improvements in the soil's water holding capacity, and finally for measuring soil carbon sequestration. Between 2023 and 2024, for the same farms using the same methods, we measured an uplift of 1.83 tonnes of carbon per hectare on land where crops were grown. These findings are really encouraging for us. They show that practices funded by Lens are effective, and there is so much to learn from the best combination of practices and understanding which combinations work best under which context, such as soil type, climate, historical land use. Whilst research data on regenerative farming is still nascent, a recent piece of research funded by the EU LIFE programme ran a detailed meta-analysis on European data, and it found that the average carbon stock difference when combining regenerative farming practices like Lens does would range between 0.75 to 1.5 tonnes of carbon per hectare per year. Now, you've probably noticed that Lens numbers are slightly above these findings, which demonstrates that high values like ours can result from the stacking of best performing practices across farms. However, numbers are not a silver bullet, and it matters to work with farms to let them see what works or not, so that they can choose the best practices for their farm businesses. And so in Hungary, for example, we have started to run farm trials with farmers, precisely to help them test what combination of land management practices work best together for soil health and crop yields, and for them to manage and to experience results firsthand. Natural infrastructure and habitats on farm, such as wildflower bands and herbal lays, are great investment choices. These habitats support biodiversity, such as insects, birds, and soil life, but also act as buffers, reducing soil runoff and ensuring less pollutants enter rivers. In a recent study, hedgerows and woodland planting has been demonstrated to lead to greatest increases in bumblebees and other pollinators in the UK. And even though most arable crops are self-pollinating to some degree, the presence of bees can lead to increased yields and other benefits such as much earlier seed set or more compact plants, which means a reduction in pod shattering, for example, for oilseed rape. Over the past year, Lens has directly helped to create the equivalent of 18 kilometers of hedgerows and wildflower strips, as well as 21 hectares of woodland. When it comes to measuring biodiversity outcomes, methods for measuring species diversity are relatively complex. Species richness, such as the count of individuals within each species group, is an accurate way of capturing species health on agricultural land, but it would require extensive primary data collection at great cost. And so instead, we've chosen to use the Cool Farms Biodiversity module, which is easily applicable to any region and relies on interviewing farmers. Using this tool, we were able to measure year-on-year changes in the key species scores. The key species scores helps to assign points to farm management practices. On the slide, we've only displayed 3 examples of species groups, but in general, the trend across Lens finds that we've increased our scores across all 11 groups, which is that farms in Lens are improving their scores significantly across all of these. This scoring system is important because it is actionable and it allows farms to set specific biodiversity objectives and track improvements over time. Water is a complex resource to monitor at landscape level and at farm level, especially when it comes to attributing change to specific practices. Our water impact looks at 3 different dimensions: water quality improvements, water resource management, and flood risk reduction. And Tris will walk us through a flood prevention case study in a short while. On the water quality side, farms in Lens are finding new ways to support crop growth by reducing their dependence on synthetic fertilizer. They're choosing to reduce their nitrogen fertilizer by trialing technologies such as precision application equipment and soil probes, and they're combining those with different land management practices such as cover cropping and legumes to boost soil fertility. And by doing so, we've measured that farms in Lens have reduced their rate of nitrogen application by hectare by 14 kilos in just 1 year across all farms and landscapes. For pesticide and herbicide reduction, farmers are testing mechanical weeding, for example, and biostimulants. And one farmer in Yorkshire explained that to him, through the Lens funding that he secured, he was able to trial these biostimulants, which has now become part of his farm strategy to manage plant health. He uses them early in the growing season to bolster plant health and growth, which means that he can reduce the amount of fungicides that he uses on his crops. And finally, for the 4th impact area, reversing agriculture from being a net emitter to being a net sink of greenhouse gas emissions is essential to mitigate climate change and its effect on the planet and the economy. Collectively, farms participating in Lens have reduced their emissions by nearly 3,000 tonnes and have sequestered 47,000 tonnes of carbon by shifting their land management practices. Now that's the equivalent of 140 hectares of newly planted woodland forests for the next 100 years. We've also starting to understand which practices contribute the most to these results. We're finding that the top 3 are switching from deep ploughing to low tillage and direct seeding. Second, increasing the diversity of plants in the crop rotation, for example, by choosing a rich species mix for cover crops or diversifying the crop rotation or setting up herbal lays. And third, by using organic fertilizers. Beyond reduced emissions and sequestration, with LENS funding, farmers are also adapting to climate change. And this happens through our innovation window funding, such as trialing new crop varieties that are more resistant to pest or weather extremes, or helping them access precision farming technologies, for example, to know when best to fertilize plants at the right time at the right rate. With significant amounts of primary data that we're collecting on farms, we're now starting to build an important data bank of farm practices and localized crop emission factors. We have compared our crop emissions factors against national benchmarks for mainstream farming, and we find that in almost every case, our emission factors are lower. These numbers evidence that farms in LENS are effective at reducing their carbon emissions to levels below the national crop benchmark. These data banks are also essential for training measurement models such as soil organic carbon models, and opens up exciting partnership opportunities between LENS and research partners. And lastly, but not least, beyond environmental benefits and impacts, LENS is also helping farmers access finance. We know that the transition to regenerative farming is costly in the first years. It really requires a rethink in terms of management practices, but also in investment in capital equipment, such as multiple pieces of specialized machinery costing upwards of £100,000. By using the impact data from LENS, this farmer was able to go to her local bank and negotiate a loan with preferential rates. LENS is helping farmers access other forms of finance, which should also help accelerate their sustainable farming ambitions, and in turn see further resilience improvements on farm. Tracking over time how the economics stack on farm, evidencing when regenerative farming leads to profitable and resilient businesses, is one of the next priorities on our impact measurement roadmap. And so with this, that leads me to pass you on to Tris, who will present the farmers' perspectives and case studies on LENS. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Catherine. Yes, my name's Tris Baxter-Smith. I'm a 5th generation farmer from Northamptonshire. I'm also the Senior Programme Manager for LENS East of England. So I thought I'd take the opportunity to give you guys a bit of familiarity with 2 case studies of some farms in Northamptonshire that have utilised the LENS process and how they've done that. My own farm in Northamptonshire is very typical, very similar to these farms, and it's very heavy clay, and we're a small arable farm. So yeah, we're very much aware of the necessity to broaden out our scope and opportunities to develop our businesses, but also mitigate our obviously climate impact. So if we can have a look at the first case study, please. That's okay, there we go. So this is our first case study. This is a very typical Northamptonshire farm. This is near Daventry, which is sort of in the west of the county. Sort of a bit Cotswoldsy in topography, very hilly, but also incredibly heavy soil in this particular area. And really the farmer in this case identified several key issues and risks in his business. And the main one was sort of peaky flooding. So flooding at really, when we have those really short, heavy rainfall blasts where we have enormous rainfall over a short amount of time. And his farm was pretty vulnerable to those sort of rainfall events, and we will see why. In the left-hand picture, you can see his land parcel outlined in red. And in the middle of that land parcel, you'll see there's a line going right up to his farm buildings, and that's his farm track. Now, all of the farmland slopes in a valley towards that track, so it's a bit of a bottleneck, and it creates various problems. First problem is huge amounts of soil erosion from his arable fields. So arable fields, obviously, if they're not cropped in between cropping, very, very vulnerable to soil erosion through heavy rainfall events. And also depending on which way your tram lines are facing, that's the lines the vehicles run up and down on, that can cause large amounts of soil to be eroded. These were all problems he had. And the whole point was he wanted to use the lens process to try and overcome and mitigate these impacts. So how did he do it? Well, in this case, it was really a series of measures. So the first measure he used was putting in these sort of interception ponds. And you can see an example of one of those in the top middle photo. Now, interception ponds were used in this case as a way of sort of storing or slowing down rainfall as it traveled down the valley. So if you imagine a series of these, a bit like a sort of fancy water feature, holding back water as it goes down the valley and preventing all of that water from entering the ditches and then going onto his arable fields, causing the erosion. So you can see a great example of one of the ponds that was taken shortly after it was created, already holding water from a rainfall event, nicely fenced off from his livestock as well in that particular field. The other measure was understanding that once the water made its way onto this driveway in particular, it was unstoppable. There's nothing you could do about it. It would run straight down this driveway, and then as you can see at the bottom of that map, there is a sort of local highway, and then there's actually some local residential dwellings as well. All of these were impacted by the flooding that was precipitated from his farmland. So he was acutely aware of his need not only to benefit the economic side of his business, by stopping the erosion problems, but also looking at how the lens process could benefit his local neighboring community and provide them with some flood resilience as well. So his idea was really interesting, and that was to put a cross-slot drain on the driveway. And we can see that in the bottom middle photo. Now, normally you don't really associate drainage and flood prevention, but in this case, it was really clever because what he was doing was taking water that would otherwise cascade down that concrete track, diverting it into a new ditch, and the ditch included a series of leaky woody structures or leaky woody dams that you can see in the right-hand side photo. Now, these don't look particularly dramatic or spectacular, but they do deliver a real meaningful difference when it comes to water speeds. And although it's not entirely clear on this photo, it's actually quite a steep sort of channel. So the importance there is to slow that water down when it's in that ditch. So these sort of leaky woody structures act as sort of water breaks, if you like. And in series, they're really effective at slowing down that flow and providing a more sustainable flow going into the local drainage system. So it's been a win-win for him. He's been really happy with it. Not only has he prevented large amounts of his soil from his arable fields eroding, he's created a series of ponds, which are fantastic for biodiversity and habitats. He's also mitigated flooding in his local community, which has not only benefited that immediate community, but it's also because at the bottom of the map, you can see there's a blue line. That is a tributary of the Nen. He will be making a small impact in flooding further down on the River Nen. So it's a multi-benefit approach, and that is what Lens is really, really good at. In this case, linking up as well these funding parties, such as a local water company in this case, and a local authority who contributed to the scheme. It's fantastic to see. So let's have a look at the next case study. Now, this one, as you can see by the photo on the left, has a clear problem. And that problem is, again, too much water in the wrong place. Now, this field in question, as you can see, was an arable field. He got caught out, as sometimes happens to farmers, when he'd harvested the crop. It then started raining and didn't stop. And we all know as farmers years where that's happened, and it's heartbreaking because you've bought all your seed and you've got nowhere to put it. So he was fed up with this, and he was thinking of innovative ways in which he could not only benefit the soil, boost the soil fertility and the soil structure, mitigate flooding, again, that key mitigating flooding in this case, but also allow him more opportunities in the future to get on and get his crop in the ground. So again, a series of wins blended into one scheme here. So how did he go about it? Using the lens model, he got the funding for this absolutely phenomenal cover crop. And I think you'll all agree, if you can see the photo there on the right. Now, I'm not pulling the wool over your eyes. This is the same field, okay? It's absolutely incredible. You wouldn't believe it. I actually took a photo from the same angle, but it was ruined by a large black Labrador that was in shot. So this is the reason why I've used this one. But you can just see by the richness of the species in that cover mix, and all of those different plants will be adding their own unique root structures to that soil, benefiting its structure and boosting its capacity to hold back water and to essentially be a giant sponge for all of that water that would otherwise have just sat on the surface, as you see from the previous photo. And yes, in truth be told, in the winter, he still had some minor issues with that field, but nowhere near as bad as he had previously. And that's just from 2 years of cover cropping now. So it's amazing what just planting something and having it in the ground over the winter can do. And this is something that would have been economically challenging to justify on a business otherwise. We all know the pressures on farming businesses, and this is not just a UK phenomenon, this is a European-wide issue of ever tighter farming budgets and ever more uncertainty coming from our governments. And in this case, he's got to factor in the purchase cost of his seed, he had to factor in his time, and also the cost of actually of planting and drilling this crop as well, and negating the fact that he didn't have an arable crop in that field. All of this he managed to get through the lens process. So that's benefited his the climate, it's benefited the farm economy and the local community. And this is another combined win that you can get through lens. It's a brilliant way of building resilience into your farming businesses. So yes, that's me. Thank you very much indeed. I hope you've enjoyed those 2 case studies and look forward to fielding any questions.
Thank you very much, Tris. And I think what you've done there is brought to life the diversity of lens funding, but also what it means on the ground practically to the many farmers that we work with. So I'd like now to turn to the questions that have come through in the Q&A function. And please, if you have any remaining, please do type them in. We're still monitoring the list. So I think, first of all, I'll turn to a question from an attendee who asks, on the payment for outcomes, are you controlling for those factors which are beyond the farmer's control, but may affect the delivery of the outcomes? And the example there is drought or flood. So I would like to turn to Kat, if you may, to answer that question.
I think we recognise that there are a number of factors outside of the control of farms, and we're not there to kind of penalise them, right? So we're here. A flood or a drought, that won't affect their payment, right? So when we go and verify measures on farms, we'll look at the reasonable evidence to see that they've taken all the, implemented all the measures and reached the outcomes that were expected. And I think Donald had a slide earlier on to explain what we meant by outcomes and how we've kind of categorized those different outcomes, which are very much tagged to what we see as the main principles behind regenerative farming. So there's things like applying a number of cover crops over a certain amount of the farm, reduced tillage, reduced use of pesticides and fertilizers, etc. So we look at those practices and has the farm reached a certain amount of coverage of their farm for these practices and principles. And so if they've shown, the best intentions to do those things,
Sorry, Kat, you broke up there. But just to complete what you were saying, that we verify and we pay. The intention is not to penalise the farmers that if there's adverse conditions that would mean that some measures couldn't be implemented, particularly around the outcomes. We would still intend to pay.
Thank you, Donald, and apologies for Kat's intermittent internet. We've been hearing most of what you've been saying. Actually, I have a hand raised from Christopher Pitt. I could take your question if you'd like to write it in the chat. I think you may actually be muted. In the meantime, I'm going to turn to another question, which I think can go to Donald. Donald, this speaks to actually the model itself, and the question is around if the carbon removals are sold to our funders as an upstream emissions reduction against their scope 3. So I was wondering if you could take that question.
Yeah, it's so the funders fund measures of which climate mitigation will be one of the outcomes that they're seeking. So we well understand that one of the big targets for a lot of our partners is to reduce scope 3 emissions and to capture more carbon within their supply chains. So it's not sold as a credit. So Lens is not a credit scheme as such, but we do report the carbon from the Lens regions and report that back to the funding organisations.
Thank you, Donald. And now on to, we've had quite a few questions regarding the pricing of the practices. So a question around how we set the prices for the diverse practices, and then how the funders benefit or account for them from their investment that they've put in. So I could answer the first part of the question on how prices are set. So over the years, over the numerous trades that we've had in Lens, we've adopted an approach whereby we've taken in the cost of delivering the Lens measures, and this year issued guide prices for each measure that's in the suite of measures for each region. So we're issuing guide prices for farmers to use as a benchmark around which to price their measures. It still enables farmers to set their measure prices based on their own costs of implementing them, and then we assess those against our annual experience of what those measures have cost in the past and negotiate an agreeable price. So there's still some flexibility for farmers to suggest prices, and the more we build Lens, the more we transact, the more experience we've got in setting those prices. I hope that answers your question. And then another question around prices, which is how do the payment rates compare to similar actions undertaken via ELMS? So that's the scheme in England. So what we do, if I can answer that also, is that we take into account where there are ELMS options available to farmers, and what Lens does is obviously not duplicate that, but build on top of what's available via ELMS. So we would encourage farmers to apply for measures that are additional to ELMS or that expand the area and the quality of those measures. So for example, if ELMS offers a 3 species cover crop, Lens could come in and pay for additional species to be added, or in fact further areas there. So yeah, we always aim to complement the public funding that is available. So I would like to turn to another question for Kat. So the question is around the kind of industry guidance that Lens is compliant with, and how corporate funders can use it to meet their targets.
My internet is back to what it should be, and you can all hear me. So yeah, there's 2 main standards that we follow really carefully and with its different guidance that's being published. So the greenhouse gas protocol with the land sector removals guidance, which is key for understanding how to account for carbon at farm level, and then how to link that to the scope 3 reporting. And so the second piece of standard is the SBTI flag guidance. And we know that the LSRG is still yet to be finalized and published, but we work closely with also our sister company, 3Keel, that are experts in sustainability and carbon accounting, and advise us closely on the latest revisions of those standards. So we're confident that
we seem to have lost you again,
okay.
Kat. So sorry. So I'm going to pick up one more question, which hopefully, Donald, you'd be able to answer, and that's which crops are under the LENS programme, and how do we ensure permanence of the practice over time, over years, and when other non-LENS crops are growing? So I think it's a question around the rotation, and maybe Kat, when she's back, could also support on this question. So I guess it's a question around the longevity of the practice, and how does it feature when other crops in the rotation are also taken into account?
Thanks, and a great question. So we enter into contracts with farmers, and those contracts, it depends on the specific measures that we're funding. So in some instances that'll be a 1-year contract. In others it will be a 3 or a 5 or a 10-year contract, particularly if it's around hedgerow plantation or woodland creation or other more permanent features into the landscape. But the idea is to maintain that level of flexibility, and ensure that the relationships that we're forming with the farmers and with the networks of farmers in each landscape is growing year on year. So it's building those relationships and those networks that allow us to have the impact that we want at the scale that we want. So that in terms of the permanence, in each landscape, it's a key feature of how we crowd in lots of different funders. So across the rotation, if that's the second part of this question, is to identify who are the different organizations that are buying the different crops from that region, and bringing them into the lens, so that we can fund around the rotation as well. What we're looking for is farm level impact, and then landscape impact as well. So if earlier in my slides, looking at that, how do we create the impact that we want, and at the scale that we need to be working with a whole range of diverse partners, and that includes working around the rotation.
Thank you, Donald. So we next have a question about what the total project administration costs are for running a lens. So if I may, I'll take that one. So what does it cost to run a lens? Well, at the moment, our lens costs are running at around 20% of total project costs. And we're seeing improvements on that year on year. So for every pound that's put in, 80 pence will go to farmer measures. So we have a good rate of impact there in terms of cost allocation. And then we have a question again for Kat, that sequestering 1.8 tons of carbon seems pretty normal. But we must get measurements that are either very close to zero or negative. What rates of positive or neutral or negative outcomes do we get?
Okay, I'm understanding this question as meaning the range that we get in terms of that sequestrating of carbon. So obviously we've presented an average, and it is true that that number will vary between the landscape, but also the types of practices that farmers have stacked on the same field. So in the report that we'll publish next week, you'll be able to see with more detail and granularity around the kind of the lowest to the highest point per landscape area. But yeah, overall, we find that this number was collected over more than 200 farms. So it's based on a large data set of information with measured soil carbon in each case. So there's quite a lot of robustness behind the average that we've published. And yeah, if you want a bit more detail, get in touch with us and we can dig into the numbers with you.
Thank you. And these are great questions and really testing the lens model and how we're measuring impact. So appreciate the thought that's gone into them. I'd like to take one from an anonymous attendee asking if this programme is totally separate from the farm's core revenue. So if interventions reduce yield and sales or enhance commodity credentials, could they attract a premium, or are we considering impacts on core revenue? So I think that's a mixed question around the lens model. Donald or Kat, do you feel in a position to respond to that?
Sorry, I was trying to multitask and answer questions in the text as well. But so is this question here about the separated from farms core revenue and interventions reduce yield? I mean, the whole purpose around lens is helping to de-risk the transition. So the recognition that moving from conventional agriculture to regenerative approaches will lead to loss of yield in the first few years and other upfront costs that will impact on the profitability of that farm business. And so that there is that de-risking and that compensatory element of financing that transition. We aren't yet, and I'd say yet it's something that we do talk about in terms of the premium value that crops coming from lens farms provide. We do have some elements around that. The example that Kat provided towards the end of her presentation of using the lens MRV reports at the farm level to access cheaper finance within the banking system is a way of leveraging the lens approach and the lens outcomes to the benefit of the farmers. But we haven't got a premium model that the lens logo will be on a bag of flour or anything like that in the near term. I think that answers that question.
I think so. Yeah, thanks, Donald. So we have a broad question here about what the limits of the lens programme that we have seen are or expecting, and how we would go about solving them. So I think we could approach this question from a landscape point of view, or maybe from a reach point of view in terms of businesses that we reach. So the limits of the lens programme. Kat or Donald or Tris, do you feel you've got a handle on that question?
I'm off mute, so I'll give a first response, and then Tris and Kat can come in. The limits on lens is we are demand led ultimately, so it's understanding the different organisations and potential funding organisations within a given landscape that we can work with, that we can help build the resilience of that landscape together. So in terms of the limits to lens, I mean, a big focus currently has been on agriculture, food production, but there's no limit to that. And water companies are a key element of lens. We're seeing energy utilities also enter into lenses now, and have discussions around infrastructure and other key aspects of the landscape. And we also are starting to explore the social dimensions as well. So what are the economics of the transition, but also how do we secure the livelihoods and ensure that we're creating good and well-paying jobs within the landscapes that we're working. So that there's lots of elements to lens that we can build into it, and as I say, is very much led by the demand partners that we're working with in any region. The other aspect to the limits to lens, and I think there was also a written question that I responded to in terms of the different geographies and regions that we're operating in. It's right to say that we're currently operating within Europe and the UK. And that's just a product of our location. But obviously the systems that we're working in, the agricultural systems that we're active in, are quite diverse. So the vine yards of northern Italy are quite different from the farming systems in Scotland or Wales, and so the mechanism around lens of crowding in interested parties to help build the resilience of landscapes is really what we're after and what we're at, and we fully anticipate that lens is an adaptable model that can be taken into different geographies globally and affect similar outcomes.
Thank you, Donald. So we're almost at time for our question session, but I've got some questions for you, Tris, that have come in regarding the farmer perspective.
Sure.
So typically, what drives farmers to reach out to you for this funding is the question.
I think that's a really good question, and it tends to be a mix of objectives, I guess. I suppose in the case studies that I gave, it was very much a sort of an issue that they had on farm, i.e. this is one of sort of climate problem. So, these heavy rainfall events had caused them sort of issues with their farming system, and they were looking at how they could mitigate that effect. As Donald's already mentioned, that obviously with local governmental sort of schemes, there is SFI, although we don't really know what that's going to look like going forward. Things like higher tier and mid-tier stewardship available in the UK, and I assume there are similar schemes in the EU as well. It's really about how lens is slightly different from those in the flexibility and the sort of more bespoke approach that it offers farmers. And I think in this case, they wouldn't have been able to get a similar sort of bespoke scheme that they designed and they had so much input in creating through one of those sort of centrally government funded schemes. So I think it was that unique approach that Lens takes that sort of offered them the opportunity in that case. And then the linking to what Isabel said about the way in which Lens sort of offers above and beyond, or complements, I should say, to some of those schemes, in that you may be frustrated by by the inability or the limitation of a scheme you're applying for, and you may think that your farm or your holding offers a wider opportunity, and in which case, as a farmer, it's on you to develop that idea. How can your land holding offer that wider opportunity, and if it can, then let's see if Lens can make that happen for you. So I think that's where it fits in, really. It's complementary and going above and beyond, I think, what the offering is coming from government. I hope that answers it without too much waffle.
I think so, Tris.
Okay.
And the penultimate question I'd also like you to quickly touch on is how quickly do we tend to crowd in farms into a region? Do we see slow uptake at first, and can we launch with just one or two?
Well, I think it's been a bit of an organic approach, hasn't it? Across, I mean, Donald, feel free to, you guys feel free to chip in, but I think from my knowledge, it's been quite organic in growing, in that a lot of news and communication through farms spread from word of mouth and from other groups of farmers talking about something that they've entered into. And also our relationship with the supply aggregators as well, so the people on the ground that help facilitate the Lens in that area. that enables the growth of a lens in a particular geography. So it's all about, starting off with successful stories, successful farm interventions, and broadening that out. Is I think how it's worked best at the moment.
Yeah,
Thanks.
maybe if I just add to that, Trace. I mean, the sort of the driving ethos of Lens has been to get going. We don't have time to wait, and we don't want to wait for perfect. So absolutely, we've started in some regions with relatively small numbers of farmers, because we know that once we get the mechanism working within a landscape, that will start to crowd in both other funders and also farmers. And there was another question in the Q&A, around do we work with individual farmers or clusters of farmers? I mean, the network effect of Lens is really powerful and is something that we value extremely highly. That bringing both the funding organisations and the farmers into the same room to share experiences, to bring that, to bring those supply chain challenges a bit closer to home is really powerful. But also the opportunity for farmers to share knowledge and understanding and experience of what has worked on their farm, and what has worked in different Lens regions. That transfer of knowledge and experience is really powerful as well. And so, that's a key element of something that we seek to support through Lens.
Thank you very much. I think it's time for one last question, and it touches on the broader question of how to get into Lens and how does a region start. So we have someone asking if we would consider a Southwest-based Lens model, and I think there, if I could take that question. We're seeing a great demand for an interest in Lens across the UK and across other regions of Europe, as you saw from Donald's map. So what does it take to build a Lens? Well, first of all, we need funders who are based and reliant upon that landscape for their activities and for their businesses. So I think with the increasing risk and adaptation required for climate change, businesses are seeing that as a material risk to their operations, and that's really what draws funders towards Lens as the solution that enables them to address that risk, but also share that risk across the landscape. So really what I'm saying is that it's generally demand driven, and from that interest, a Lens can be born by connecting that need for risk mitigation with those who can offer the solutions, which are the land managers and the farmers. So that's generally how a Lens starts, and as Donald illustrated, that started in Cumbria between United Utilities with their particular risk and Nestle, again based in the same landscape, facing the same kind of risk. And it's that collaboration that brings together that need and that answer to really build resilience in the landscape with those that can deliver the change, which are the farmers and the land managers. So if I may draw the webinar to a close now, and what we'd like to do is very much thank you for attending, but also not stop the conversation here, and that if you have any further questions, please do reach out via the email address here, and would be really excited to answer. And what we're going to do is publish the webinar so that those who've signed up and couldn't attend can watch it. So if there are any other comments from members of the panel, please do chip in now. Donald, Tris, and Kat.
I've got two small additional points. Firstly, there's some great questions in the Q&A that we haven't managed to get to, and I'm currently trying to respond to one just now, but multitasking is clearly not a forte. So I would like to get back to some of these respond to some of these questions with answers, because they're good questions, and think of a format that we can do that. Perhaps we can circulate a FAQ as well with the recording of the webinar. But secondly, I would just like to say what a great session it has been, and lots of great questions, which sort of suggests that we've hit the right notes in terms of stimulating thoughts and ideas of how Lens might be able to operate in different landscapes, and how the model itself achieves the impact and the resilience that we're aiming to achieve. So yeah, thanks for everyone for joining, and look forward to circulating the impact report next week, which will have all the details.
Thank you very much, Donald. So thank you for joining, and we really appreciate your attendance and attention today.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, all.